Okay, so time to move on to our final project. We're going to be working from Thomas Mostyn, a turn of the century landscape artist. He did these sort of idealized fantasy landscapes. And we're going to be working from his references because they follow the rules that we use in landscape painting almost to a T. You can see here clearly that his work is divided into thirds. So in the lower third, you can see the city in the distance. The top 2/3 are the sky. And as the colors come towards us, they become more red. Those colors further away are more misty, less defined, and more blue. There's more contrast as well as we move towards the viewer. I've pre-mixed my colors, so because these blues really contaminate the other colors, I've started by mixing my yellow colors to make sure they stay pure longer. I've made a light yellow and then a sand color, as we did in the previous demonstration, and then a yellow mixed with white. For my blues, I've mixed together cyan and ultramarine with a tiny bit of red to bring down that dark value. Then I've also mixed part of that with some white and a little bit more ultramarine added to part of that, and also some white. But you can just mix around with the sky values. The light dark values are more important than the actual color. So think more about how the light is transitioning than the color. And I'm using cardboard, so we can use the nice acrylic paper in class, but you can create a sort of sealed surface if you put down your first layer of paint on a surface like reused cardboard, if you keep your paint really dry. So if you use very little water with your paint and immediately use a hair dryer to dry it, you can use just about any surface by essentially creating your own canvas with the plastic of the acrylics. It kind of seals whatever it's put down on, but you don't want it to sink into the paper too much. So I'm going to start by painting down the sky using my largest brush on hand. And I'm going to try to get as much of this down wet on wet as possible. The reason I've painted this sort of Pepto-Bismol pink is it tends to tone down these straight from the bottle colors. So it seems a little bit more realistic. I won't have any bright white or brown paper showing through. The red actually will blend in quite well if anything shows through. It's a good way of toning down your values and making them a little bit more realistic. And now I'm going to move into the lower part of the sky here with my lighter blue value. And, whoa, I picked up some paint, that's fine. You can always smooth out areas by just dabbing with your sponge. If you're not working quite so fast, then you can just use the sponge to soften up your sky. I like that because I don't love streaky brush strokes for areas where you're not meant to see texture, and as things move further into the distance, we don't want a whole lot of texture on our page. And now I'm just coming down with this lighter blue as I move towards the lower third, and then I'm just going to do everything in reverse. I'm going to move into that second blue. Just going to dab, dab, dab to make sure that mixes. If you put something down that doesn't look right, don't panic. Just, if you can, dab it up with a sponge while the paper's still wet. If you can't, no worries. Don't worry, you can paint over just about everything here. So, don't go for perfection in your first layers. Try to get more information down so that you have a sense of what you're working with. And I'm going to bring in some blues. I don't really need to go down to the base of the page here because I'm going to be layering on top of it. But just in the rare event that the texture of this first layer shows through, I'm going to just bring this sky all the way down here because I don't want my foreground to be in any way recessed as compared to my background. And sometimes if you do really thick paint layers with acrylics, they'll show through in subsequent layers. So it's worth just the extra step of bringing all of that background all the way down. It just ensures that everything is ordered correctly. And you can just think of it in terms of distance. The sky's the furthest, the land's the closest. So the furthest thing is just going to be the base for the closer things. And now I'm going to move in with the horizon. And for this, I'm actually just going to start by using card. I'm going to dip the side of my card into my light yellow value. And then remembering, okay, where's the lower third? I'm just going to place this along the lower third of the page. Around here, I'm just going to pull this up. And I don't want too much texture with this card, but it's okay if there is. I'm going to move it up here because I can see some light coming through. Then I'm going to cut my card in half, and I'm going to make some vertical marks. And I'm letting the paper just kind of scrape against the surface here. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of blue into that yellow. I'm just doing that using the card, but you can use your palette knife. And my goal here is to create a greenish color just to get a little variation in the buildings in the back. Don't make your buildings too big. So I think I've already made these a little bit too big. It's one of those weird things where we do tend to make things like buildings in the distance just a little bit too large, but it's all right. Just gonna move in here. And then with that kind of greenish color, add a little bit of white to that. I'm just going to come across with some horizontal marks. So I'm just pulling my bit of paper across and then dragging it down a little bit. You can dip back into the yellow as well. And this mix of like horizontal and vertical marks works very well for creating reflections. I'm just adding a little bit more light as we move into this intersection of thirds. The eye will be drawn towards the light. So you want to be careful with your light values that, they're fairly intentional as you move along, because that's what people will be looking at. And I'm also going to use a little bit of my dark value on the card just to create some darker undersides. So I'm just doing kind of a few more of these horizontal marks as we get closer to the shore and the values get a little bit deeper. Just mixing a little bit of red in to make a very dull blue to bring over here to define the skyline a bit. For even finer ripples, you can cut a piece of your cartridge paper. Just careful that the ripples are actually horizontal, because if you have a couple of them off, like I sort of do here, it can mess with the overall reflectiveness of what you're painting. Okay, so I'm gonna get my hairdryer, leave that there, and then come in with the foreground. Okay, so now I am ready to do the background. So I've mixed together a reddish purple and a lot of it. I'm going to use this to do the entire background, to block it out with to begin with. And I also just want to look at the proportion of details. So for instance, we've got this thing here, and we've got kind of, I'd say this is in almost like the lower half of the lower third, this area here, just around here. You can just sort of mark out sections, maybe the lower fifth or so. And I want to think about what things are in sharp contrast and what things aren't. So that's a sharp contrast, that's a sharp contrast, but the trees back here aren't. So I'm going to use my useful little bit of cardboard here to help make some sharp lines for the foreground and some of those details. And then we are going to be using our sponge as we move into the trees in the back. So I'm holding this to the side so that I can just paint right over that. And I'm going straight over the lighter values because I can just layer on top of these. So I'm not too worried about those. So up here, and then even though the little, like, whatever you call it, plinth is white, I'm going to look at where that sits with the rest of the landscape. It's around here, and I'm going to do it in this dark purple to start with. And an easy way to do this is just pull your piece of card to the side, and then the other side. And I can break off a smaller piece of this to define the top. So I'm just going to get a fresh piece of card, slightly smaller size. And I'm just going to get a more defined top of this banister type thing. And then just because I'm a bit lazy, I'm going to do all the other stuff that I need to do with the card at this point. So like I've got a tree coming up here. Just gonna get the trunk. I'm going to kind of lightly brush the inside of this just so that I don't have little lumps when I layer on top of it. And I'm just using this little side of card to plot out the shapes of the tree trunks. I'm going to use a bit of a larger piece of card here. I can see some branches up here. I know it's a bit dark on the screen, but I'm just making a few kind of crisscrossy lines for any branches, just little details of branches. I'm also going to use the side of my palette knife to make some super thin twig-like shapes that are going to show up underneath the sponging when I come over with it. I'm going to take my brush to finish up painting in the foreground. And just sort of tap it on its side, moving up here. And also tap on the side around here. And then because there are some like slightly more wishy-washy branches in the background, I'm gonna turn on the light just to see if that, no, that doesn't help. Okay, that gives us a bit more light, just trying to move the computer. So you can, well, I'll do this side first. So since there's some softer leaves in the shadow in the back, I'm going to add a little bit more water to my acrylic, to that purple, to create these little bits of tree that are a bit further away from us. And I'm sponging that on using the sponge. So starting with the stuff furthest away here, sponging with a wet kind of glaze. And then using heavier paint as I move towards details that will be in the foreground. Wondering why this isn't a shade. can make this a bit lighter without the camera falling in the paint. Okay, that might help a little bit. Just gonna sponge up here. And just to vary the texture so it doesn't get too mushy, I'll move back to that the dry brushing technique that we covered in the intro. Make sure you go straight over the tape. You don't want to have like a little border in your painting where the viewer can see that you're trying to avoid something. You want to go straight over that. And that's another reason why it's good to kind of just continue your backgrounds through so you don't have little lines showing where you've started and stopped. And there's a little figure here, but I don't think I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna make this area a little bit more fuzzy. Okay, and now I am going to use the hairdryer and then come in with my lighter values. So sorry, this is going to be a bit noisy. Get my flat brush, make sure it's totally clean because I want this color to be really pure. I'm going to come in with the very lightest values now. So for my reference, I have a big white space coming around here where the light's hitting, a little bit of light on the trunk, and then all these flowers in the foreground. So I'm going to start with this path here. Just using my flat brush, side to side, following the light. And I'm using that yellow color that I mixed up, that sandy color. Now I'm adding in more yellows as I move to the sides. And then more of the reddish tones that I've made for my sand color. And because it's always useful to use one color at a time, I'm going to look for any other places that I can use these yellows before I have to mix up another color. And I can see that there's some light reflected across the trunks of the trees. Then in the distance, the whites become a little bit bluer. There's also a little bit of light reflected that's a similar kind of yellow color on the lower branches, but I'm just going to add a bit of water to this mix because I don't want it to be super bright. And you'll see that the yellows mix with the purples to create a sort of brown that's quite good for backgrounds. So now I'm going to make a sort of soft greenish color, and I'm going to use the kind of convenience green that I've put on your palettes for this, just to bring another value into this. So let me get that green. I'm going to mix it with some white. I'm going to make one version of this that's kind of more green, and then I'm going to make another version that has a little bit of red in it, so it's a little bit toned down. And also with a bit more of this cadmium yellow. It's a bit too much. I want kind of like a brownish green with more of a yellow overtone. Get some more white. Right, now I'm going to take the side of my palette knife, pull that light across, this little plinth here. I'm going to use the darker shadow value at the base. Actually, that's, as I move towards the base, it's a little bit more of yellowed color, so I'm just going to mix a couple colors together and see if that works. Yeah, that works. And you can just see the side of the plinth. Lit up by the light around it. And I'm going to soften those tones. Since this is a white, it's supposed to be a white plinth that's reflecting what's going on around it. I just want to think about what colors we're going to have surrounding it. I need to redefine this edge because there's a very bright building right next to it. So we've redefined that edge now. Our little plinth. It's going to be a bit darker at the top. And now I'm going to move in with some pure ultramarines for the shadows. So I'm going to mix together some ultramarine with a little bit of white. I'm going to use that to soften some of the shadows in the foreground. Can add a little bit of red to that. a little bit of pure ultramarine. And this will help just break up the shadows into more nuanced colors. Okay, and finally, I am ready to come in with some greens, reds, and oranges for the flowers. So for my green, I'm just going to mix together the ultramarine and the cadmium yellow and dab around the branches that are going to be reflecting the light. So kind of around the edges. I'm just gonna add little bits of red to that as I move upwards, just to tone down that brightness. You have sort of like a red halo around the green leaves where the light's just kind of falling back. And you can mix together different greens to create more variety. Like you can use the convenience green. As colors get closer to the light, they tend to get purer, less convoluted. So I'm using less reds in my green as I move towards these areas where there's light. And I'm also using more yellow. And let me get nice dark greens layered. You want to keep the contrast up, so be careful not to over paint your dark areas with lighter colors, because we want really nice, strong contrasting values. Adding more reds towards the paint in the foreground. And now for the flowers, I'll use a mix of yellows and reds and pinks. So I just need a little bit more yellow. can use either your sponge or your brush for this. And try and angle your brush in different directions to give a little bit more nuance and depth to where the flowers are kind of turning. They get really bright around here, so I'm just gonna layer in a lot of lighter values here. And there are also some more sort of bluish flowers. So just gonna mix a bit of ultramarine and white and make some nice glowing little white flowers. And then I'm going to piece in just any kind of green that I'm missing. So I need a lot more kind of light greens around the flowers here. Still allowing a little bit of contrast to remain. Now I'm just going to fast forward through the finishing touches, which takes a little while, but you could just leave it here. I'm going to use a fine brush. I'm going to bring in the figure in the foreground. Then I'm going to do a couple shadows on the building, just sort of mixing the paint as I go along. But hopefully this was helpful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what everyone gets finished in class.